this lecture, we'll be talking about 4 styles of parenting and different ways to influence your child's behavior. Before we begin talking about the styles of parenting, I want to say that parents tend to parent the way that they were parented, unless something occurs to change their mind. It tends to be a natural progression that that's what they know, and that tends to be the automatic of how they parent. Most parents are parenting in a way that they believe is best for their child. So we'll look at the research and see what the research says tends to be best. But keep in mind that parents are just doing the best that they can. They often don't recognize or realize what the outcomes are. Authoritarian parents tend to be restrictive and punitive. They tend to have rigid rules and rigid expectations that they strictly enforce. They demand obedience of their children, and they demand that their child respect them and respect their authority. They tend to have little verbal exchange between their children and them, and they often see their child asking questions or clarification as questioning their authority, because for them, parental control is very important. The outcomes for these children tend not to be the best. These children tend to be more likely to be unhappy. They might be fearful because many authoritarian parents might use physical punishment. They tend to have lower self-esteem and poor social skills. Indulgent parenting, also called permissive parenting, these parents tend to let their child's preference take priority. They rarely force their child to conform to any parental standards or have many rules for their children. They believe that the child's freedom of expression and autonomy are very important. So these children never learn to control their own behavior, and they tend to believe that they should get their own way. So they rarely respect others. So the outcomes are not great. These children are more likely to have poor self-control because they weren't required to do that by their parents when they were younger. They tend to be bossy and domineering and egocentric and have difficulties with their peers. Authoritative parenting is a democratic style parenting, but this doesn't mean that children get a vote in everything. But in some cases, the children get to say and be a part of decision making, or get to, share their thoughts, but ultimately the parents are going to be the one to make the rules and decide what's going to happen. So parents are going to establish clear rules and expectations and discuss them with their child. They're going to be controlling, but this control is going to be exercised in conjunction with support. So they're going to be aware of their child's feelings and their child's capabilities. They're going to acknowledge their child's perspective, but still enforce parental standards. So they're going to acknowledge, yeah, I understand that you're, really sad and frustrated that you can't do this, but this is why. They're going to encourage the development of their child's autonomy within reasonable limits, and they're going to change rules as the child grows and develops. Right, so we're not going to have the same rules for a 5-year-old as we are for a 15-year-old, because we're going to adjust this based on their capabilities, based on their developmental stage and what they're capable of. And they're going to rely heavily on positive reinforcement, giving the child something that they want to encourage behavior again, so focusing on what they're doing well and encouraging that. The outcomes for these kids tend to be the best of the 4 parenting styles. These kids tend to be more likely to be cheerful and self-controlled, self-reliant, achievement-oriented, and have good social skills. Neglectful parenting is our last style of parenting. This is sometimes also called rejecting or uninvolved parenting. These parents tend to be pretty uninvolved in their child's life, so they're not paying much attention to their child's needs. This might even be basic needs, like making sure that the child is eating healthy and has the right clothes to keep them warm, or is getting enough sleep. They seldom have expectations regarding the child's behavior, but this is not because of the permissive parent who just wants, them to express themselves. It's more likely because they're just very uninvolved in their child's life. So these parents could be neglectful, they could be abusive, they could be dealing with potentially dealing with addiction or mental or physical health issues themselves that is taking their attention away from their child. So the outcomes for these kids are quite poor. They're more likely to be socially incompetent, have problems with independence, have poor self-control, low self-esteem, and even be more likely to be delinquent. Next, we'll be discussing different ways that we can influence our child's behavior, encourage them to act in a way that we want them to. We want to begin by talking about discipline. When we think about the word discipline, it really means to teach. So our goal as parents and caregivers is to teach our children to behave in ways that are socially appropriate. Discipline varies a great deal from family to family and culture to culture. Ideally, parents are going to anticipate misbehavior, anticipate things that children might do, and be able to guide their children towards patterns that will be more helpful and more socially appropriate. It's important to realize that no disciplinary technique is going to work all the time for all children, so it's useful to have a variety of strategies. A first thing to remember and to be thinking about is we want to model the behavior that we want to see in our children. Because remember Albert Bandura's social learning theory, children are going to be watching us and they're going to be copying us. We also want to problem solve situations together with our child if we can, especially as they get into early childhood and middle childhood and adolescence. Help them learn problem solving skills that they can use when you're not around, and help them figure out win-win situations and solutions that they can use that they can feel good about. It's important that we have consistency of rules and consequences because children can get confused if we don't, and to follow through with consequences because if we say that they're going to be grounded if they do that again and they do it again and we don't ground them or don't give them a consequence, they're going to pick up on that very quickly and realize that that's just a threat. It's an empty threat. They're not going to follow through with it. Children need to know the rules and the consequences for breaking them. So this might mean that we need to give them a warning so that they know what might happen if they do break that rule. And parents should present a united front. So if there's more than one parent involved in raising a child, we want to make sure that they're on the same page and they present a united front so parents aren't being seen as the good parent and the bad parent or having children use them against each other to get what they want. We want to make sure that we have realistic expectations for what your child is actually developmentally capable of doing, and so that we are adjusting what we're expecting our child to do based on their age and their developmental abilities. When they do misbehave, we can lean on natural versus and logical consequences. Both of these are useful, and sometimes we use them interchangeably, but they do have slightly different meanings. Natural consequences are just the direct result of a physical act. So unless it's a safety issue, parents should lean into these natural consequences and just let them happen. So a natural consequence might be if you don't eat dinner, you're going to get hungry. If you don't wash your clothes or put your dirty clothes in the laundry, then they're not going to get washed. If you don't study for an exam, you're not going to get a good grade on it. A logical consequence is an event that follows a social act. Now, we don't have to place moral blame or judgment on a child. We can just give them a logical consequence, but the logical consequence should be one that a parent can accept. So, logical consequences, if you lie, other people won't believe you. If you misuse the family car, then your parents aren't going to trust you with it, and maybe you don't get to use the family car anymore. Both natural and logical consequences are directly related to the act itself. Thinking a little bit more about logical consequences, this is really useful for parents to be thinking about devising consequences that are appropriate to the child's misbehavior. And we can use the 3 R's of logical consequences. 1 is related to the behavior. 2, it's respectful. We're not trying to humiliate them. And 3, it's reasonable. It's designed to teach but not induce suffering. So an example of a logical consequence, maybe the misbehavior is an adolescent comes home an hour past the curfew. A logical consequence that follows these three R's is that they have to come home an hour earlier than their normal curfew next time you allow them to go out. This is related to the problem behavior of being late for curfew. It's respectful, we're not humiliating them, and it's reasonable. It's designed to teach them that if you stay out late and past when was appropriate, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. You're going to need to come back earlier. Behavior modification is related to Skinner's theory that we discussed in the theory section. And behavior modification incorporates reinforcement and punishment. So we often hear these terms, but sometimes we don't understand the differentiation between them. So reinforcement is when we're trying to increase the likelihood that a behavior will occur again, right? They did something well, we want them to do it again. Maybe they were nice to their younger sibling, and we want them to do that again. So a positive reinforcement would be something desirous, something that they want is implemented or added. So it might be that, oh my goodness, you are the best big sister ever. You were so nice to your little brother, right? All kids want praise, so that would be an example of positive reinforcement, which remember we said authoritative parents do a lot of. Now we have negative reinforcement. This doesn't mean that it's a bad thing to do. Negative is referring to something being removed. In this case, we're removing something aversive, something that they don't like to do. Wow, you did such a great job doing your chores this week. I'm going to take one of those chores away and I will do it for you, right? No one likes to do chores. So in this case, to encourage them to do their chores well again, I'm taking one of those aversive chores away. So that would be negative reinforcement. Still trying to increase the likelihood that they're going to do their chores well, but in this case, taking something away that they don't like to do anyway. Now we have punishment. This is when they misbehave, and we're trying to reduce the likelihood that they're going to behave that way again. We have positive and negative punishment. Again, none of these are bad. These are just referring to whether we're adding something, implementing it, or removing something, taking it away. So positive punishment is when something aversive is implemented, right? So you have to, you didn't do a good job with your chores this week. You didn't follow through with all of them. And so now you have an extra chore, right? Now you need to clean the toilets. No one likes to clean the toilets. So that would be very clear positive punishment. Negative punishment is when something desirous is removed, right? You didn't finish your homework because you were on your computer so long playing games, and so now your computer time is going to be decreased, right? You're not going to be able to play games for the next couple days, right? So playing games is something you really like, but we don't want you to not do your homework, right? We don't want that to happen again where you're missing your homework, and so we're taking something desirous away. Now, providing praise was an example of positive reinforcement that I gave, and it's such an important example because children depend on their parents for the development of their self-concept. So really, you want to focus on providing praise anytime we can, even if it's something small. Catch the child doing something good and reinforce it by telling them how great they did. It's quick, it's easy, it's free. It makes such a big difference. Here are some other additional examples of negative consequences or punishments, right? So ignoring. Ignoring is a really useful behavior as long as it's not a safety situation. Sometimes we can ignore misbehavior like whining or sulking or pouting because these are often used to get attention. And if we don't want to give attention to a behavior that we don't want to continue to occur, we can just ignore it and it'll be more likely to go away. There's also social disapproval. Sometimes just a few words spoken in a firm voice with a disapproving facial expression, right? Use that mom voice or that dad voice and give them the look. They're less likely to do that behavior again. Timeouts are also really useful for younger kids. And timeouts are just when you choose a quiet place for that child to calm down if they're overly stimulated and misbehaving, maybe throwing a tantrum. Allow them to sit in a quiet place, think about their behavior. Try not to do it in a bedroom. And we do 1 minute for each year that the child is old. So if they're 4 years old, 4 minutes. And then talk about the situation afterwards. In general, we want to avoid physical punishment whenever possible. This can have some negative long-term effects, and it's not a great thing that we want to model.